You're listening to a production of the National Media Archive. To learn more or volunteer, go to nationalmediaarchive.com.
In the summer of 1995, China moved a large number of its troops to the province called Fujian. They started testing missiles and broadcasting it for the whole world to see. After that, they carried out big, well-publicized combat drills. These drills looked exactly like what an actual invasion across the 130-kilometer wide stretch of water would be if they were to try to take over the island of Taiwan. From China's point of view, Taiwan is not an independent country, but instead a rebellious island province left over from an unfinished civil war. Back then, all this military muscle flexing was China's way of making a point because Taiwan's president had asked for permission to visit the United States. The lawmakers in the United States said yes, which angered Beijing and undermined China's claim that Taiwan is not a separate country. On top of that, Taiwan was about to hold its first true democratic election, which China absolutely hated. Less than a week before the election, China announced new military drills near Taiwan. They wanted to remind everyone who was really in charge in their eyes. So China put on a huge display of force, hoping to scare Taiwan and send a warning to the United States to stay out of what they considered their domestic affairs. But the United States did not stay out. The United States decided to respond in a big way. It sent the largest display of its military force in Asia since the conflict in Vietnam. President Bill Clinton ordered in the biggest ships, the most advanced aircraft carriers, guided missile cruisers, destroyers, and many other powerful weapons. All this American power moved right through waters around Taiwan. The message could not have been clearer. The United States was telling China to back down and let Taiwan handle its own business. And back then, this show of force worked. China stood down and the United States came out looking like the unbeatable superpower that no one dared to challenge. Fast forward about 20 years to more recent times. A lot has changed. China is at it again, trying to intimidate Taiwan, but doing it differently this time. Now, their favorite tactic is flying military planes into Taiwan's airspace that is called the Air Defense Identification Zone. An air defense identification zone is basically a section of sky that if you fly through it, you are expected to announce yourself. If you do not announce who you are, the country that owns that airspace assumes you might be coming to attack. Recently, China has started flying its planes into this airspace over and over without saying a word. Not just once or twice either, but dozens of times every single day and hundreds of times each month. If you could see it on a map, you would see wave after wave of Chinese flight paths crossing into Taiwan's airspace and turning back. It is a loud and clear reminder from China to Taiwan about who they believe is really in charge. Researchers have been tracking every single one of these flyovers. For example, the Foreign Policy Research Institute has put together very detailed data on each Chinese flight. In one peak week, right when China was celebrating its own founding anniversary, they sent an especially strong message by flying over Taiwan's airspace again and again. They also ran a state-owned news headline basically telling Taiwan that war is not just talk, it is real. So, what did the United States do in response this time? The United States sent in guided missile destroyers through those same waters, showing the flag, so to speak. Canada joined in too by sending ships. The idea was to calm things down by showing presence, just like they did in the 1990s. But this time, it did not have the same effect. Instead of stepping back, China flew even more military planes over Taiwan's airspace. It became an almost daily routine. The world could see from the data that these flights kept happening again and again. This is not the same situation as the 1990s. Back then, China did not have the military power it does now. Today, China's military is massive and much more advanced than it was back then. Along with that, China's desire to bring Taiwan back under its control has only grown stronger every single year. That difference is what makes this so important to understand if we want to imagine what a real conflict in this area could look like. I have been talking with military analysts and reading deep into official military writings from China to figure out what a war over Taiwan could look like. War is always unpredictable, but it helps to look at a possible scenario to see what choices each country would face if it really happened. This is not just a history lesson. This is about a situation that could become the next big war involving the United States and its closest allies. One thing to remember is that China does not actually want an all-out war if it can be avoided. They would rather find other ways to get Taiwan to sit down and talk about reunification. But war is messy. One wrong move or misunderstanding can quickly spiral into something much bigger that no one can fully control. That is the wildfire of conflict. Once it starts, it is incredibly hard to put it out. So let's walk through what could happen step by step. The first piece of this is a Chinese law that spells out how Taiwan fits into their plan. This law basically says that if Taiwan ever tries to officially declare independence, or if all peaceful options to reunite fail, China is required by law to use force to protect what they see as their territory. Think about that. For 70 years, peaceful solutions have been tried but have not worked. Meanwhile, support among the people of Taiwan for becoming part of China has dropped to its lowest level ever. So every year, the chance that China sees peaceful options as exhausted gets higher. And under their own rules, that means they must act. Combine that with China's new and much larger military, which includes modern missiles, advanced fighter jets, submarines, helicopters, tanks, and the biggest naval fleet in the world by number of ships. Even though the ships in the United States fleet are generally larger and more powerful, the sheer size of China's fleet is no joke. This buildup has caused real worry in the United States military. High-ranking officials say they see the problem coming closer and closer, and they believe it demands serious attention now, not later. Now picture this scenario. China decides the only way Taiwan will rejoin the mainland is by force. Maybe blockades and negotiations have failed. So the first strike might look like just another flyover. Taiwan has gotten used to these. But instead of just turning back, the fighter jets keep going straight toward the island and open fire. At the exact same moment, missiles are launched from China's mainland. More fighter jets take off. The attack is coordinated down to the second. The targets are anything Taiwan could use to fight back. Radar, communication hubs, Air Force bases, bridges, Navy ports, command centers, power stations, government buildings, anything that could help Taiwan defend itself. Runways are especially vulnerable because they are wide open and easy to hit. All of this happens fast before Taiwan can fully react. One expert described it like this: if China truly intends to invade, the strikes will be focused in a short, brutal wave with only brief pauses to reload, regroup, or repair equipment. It would be terrifying. Taiwan's leaders would probably run underground to protected command bunkers to figure out how to strike back. And not everything would be lost for them. Some of Taiwan's aircraft hangars are buried deep inside mountains, making them very hard to destroy. Some missile launch sites are hidden well enough to survive the first wave too, so Taiwan would have something to fight back with. They would likely launch fighter jets into the sky and fire their own missiles back toward China. Their goal would be to damage Chinese air bases and radar stations on the mainland to slow down the attack. At the same time, Taiwanese troops would rush to the island's western beaches to lay mines and build defenses. They would be preparing for boatloads of Chinese troops headed their way to land and try to push them back. This would all happen in just a few short hours. Meanwhile, the United States would only be starting to understand what is happening because China would be trying to jam communications and keep American satellites from getting a clear look. China has even developed small robots that can attach themselves to satellites in space, originally built to help fix them. But in this scenario, they could be used to block the view of American spy satellites. So now, the United States president and military leaders have to decide how to respond. Are they really going to send American soldiers into danger to defend an island on the other side of the Pacific Ocean? It is a tough call. Many people in the United States would not support that idea, but doing nothing is also not an option. At the same time, back on the beaches, Chinese ships packed with troops and supplies would be crossing the stretch of water between China and Taiwan. Military ships, supply boats, even commercial vessels could be used. And because Taiwan's defenses are damaged, many of these ships would reach the shore. But the beaches would not be empty. Taiwanese troops would be there with mines and barricades trying to stop the landing. Heavy fighting would break out along the coast as the first wave of Chinese troops tries to push inland. Meanwhile, the United States and its closest allies, likely Japan and Australia, would be scrambling jets, bombers, stealth fighters, and submarines from bases in the region, such as in Japan and Guam. Their goal would be to hit the ships carrying troops and supplies across the water. And that is where the nightmare grows larger. Now you have two massive nuclear-armed powers fighting directly. The fear is that no one knows how far it could go. War has a way of spiraling. Once the first shots are fired, it is very hard to know where the ceiling is, especially when nuclear weapons are involved. Sometimes China's own military plans even talk about the idea that other countries might take advantage of the chaos. They predict that India might see this as a moment to push into disputed borders in the Himalayas to the south. Tibetan groups in the far west of China who have long wanted freedom might rise up too. Suddenly, a conflict that started with Taiwan could set off fires in other places, only the beginning. So let us pick back up on this beach invasion. Picture thousands of Chinese troops now on Taiwan's western shores, fighting through the minefields and coastal barriers that Taiwan's defenders rushed to put in place. As soon as they gain a foothold, they would try to push further inland toward major cities. Their goal would be to reach urban centers fast, because controlling the big cities means controlling the roads, the airports, the ports, everything that matters. Meanwhile, the United States and its allies would be striking hard at the sea lanes. Submarines would target the supply ships and troop carriers in the water. Aircraft would drop bombs or launch missiles from far away, trying to sink as many vessels as possible before they can reach Taiwan. The ocean would quickly become a chaotic battleground of missiles, underwater torpedoes, and warplanes flying overhead. But here is the problem. The moment American forces attacked Chinese ships, they would be crossing a line into direct combat with China. This is not just a skirmish anymore. This is two of the world's strongest militaries clashing head-on. The stakes get higher with every missile launched, because both sides have nuclear weapons, and everyone knows that if things get too out of hand, it could spiral into something much worse. Some experts even believe that China, if they felt cornered, might expand the conflict in the first hours by striking American military bases in places like Japan or Guam. If that happened, it would guarantee the United States throws its full military force into the fight. No more hesitation. That kind of escalation would make the entire region a hot zone, drawing in more allies, more weapons, and more lives at risk. On Taiwan itself, the cities would brace for urban warfare. Street fighting is messy and brutal. It is hard for any army to push through tight, winding neighborhoods filled with civilians. Taiwan's defenders would have an advantage here because they know the terrain. They know the buildings, the tunnels, the hidden routes. They would do everything they could to hold the cities and slow the advance. The longer Taiwan could hold on, the more time the United States and its allies would have to break apart China's supply lines in the ocean. If they can sink enough ships and block reinforcements, they might be able to starve the invasion of the supplies it needs to keep pushing forward. But that is a big if. There are also huge unknowns about how other countries would react. Japan has defense treaties with the United States, and Taiwan is very close to Japan's southern islands. If conflict breaks out this close to Japan's home territory, they might feel they have no choice but to get involved. Australia, too, has military ties with the United States and might send forces to help. And then there's the question of how the rest of the world would respond. Would Europe stay out of it? Would countries like India take advantage of China being distracted to settle their own border disputes? Would Russia stay on the sidelines, or would they try to make moves of their own elsewhere while everyone's attention is focused on Taiwan? No one knows for sure, and that is what makes this scenario so dangerous. Once the first shots are fired and troops are landing on beaches, there is no easy way to pause and talk things out. Every new attack could trigger a response. Every new response could bring in another player. It is important to remember that all of this would be happening while millions of people, ordinary families, are caught in the middle. They would be trying to survive in cities under attack with power outages, blocked roads, food shortages, and constant danger. Some would try to flee, but an island like Taiwan has limited ways off during war. Airports and ports would likely be shut down or too dangerous to reach. Inside China, the government would be working hard to keep its people united behind the cause. They would probably tighten control over news and social media to push one message: that this is about protecting China's territorial integrity and finishing what they see as unfinished business from a civil war. Meanwhile, leaders in Taiwan would be sending messages to their people too, urging them to resist, to stay strong, to hold out until help arrives. The world would watch it all unfold on live television through cell phone footage, satellite images, and nonstop news coverage. It would be one of the most closely followed conflicts in modern history. In the background, powerful militaries would be making incredibly tough calls every single hour. Should they target certain ships or bases? Should they risk hitting civilian areas if those areas are being used by the other side? How do they prevent the fight from spilling over into space, cyberspace, or even turning nuclear? Remember, China has spent years building up weapons that can knock out satellites. Taking out satellites would blind the other side, cutting off crucial communication and navigation systems. Cyber attacks would be another front, hacking power grids, disrupting banking systems, or trying to sow chaos on social media to weaken resolve. And then there is the scary truth that once two nuclear-armed nations are locked in a high-stakes fight, the possibility of miscalculations goes way up. One side might think the other is about to go nuclear and decide to strike first. That is the ultimate nightmare that every military planner hopes never happens. All of this shows why the idea of a war over Taiwan is so terrifying for leaders around the world. No one wants it, but the situation has so many moving parts, so much deep history, and so much national pride on the line that it remains a real possibility. The scenario I have been describing is not the most likely outcome. Most experts believe that China will keep trying to pressure Taiwan without using full-scale force. They will use blockades, economic punishments, cyber attacks, or diplomatic isolation to make life hard for Taiwan's leaders until they feel they have no choice but to negotiate. But that slow squeeze is still dangerous because it keeps tensions high, and when tensions are high, mistakes happen. A single misread radar blip, a misfired missile, or a jet pilot who goes too far can turn a cold standoff into a hot war in an instant. And when that spark comes, everything we just walked through becomes possible. Troops on beaches, ships sunk at sea, cities in ruins, lives forever changed. That is why people pay such close attention to Taiwan when talking about the future of global peace. It is the test case for whether powerful countries in the 21st century can resolve their biggest disputes without repeating the worst parts of the 20th century, when global wars killed tens of millions. And that is why this story, however frightening, matters so much. If such a nightmare scenario were to begin, what comes after? Some believe the fighting might stop once China feels it has proven its point and forced Taiwan's leaders to surrender. Others think Taiwan would fight on for weeks or months, turning the island into a symbol of resistance. Still others fear the conflict could drag on for years, drawing in more countries and draining resources and lives in ways that reshape entire economies. Imagine the aftershocks, refugee crises, as people try to flee the island by any means possible. International markets would be thrown into chaos. The stretch of water between China and Taiwan is one of the busiest shipping lanes in the world. Any disruption would slam the flow of goods, microchips, raw materials, all the things that keep factories running, and shelves stocked everywhere from Europe to the Americas. Countries that depend on Taiwan's technology, especially advanced computer chips, would scramble to find replacements. Prices for electronics would skyrocket, businesses would shut down, whole industries could stall. And for regular people, the ripple effects would show up in job losses, empty store shelves, and higher prices for everyday items. Meanwhile, the rest of the world would have to decide how to handle China after such a bold move. Would countries impose harsh sanctions? Would they cut off trade? Would they send more troops or weapons to the region to contain any future aggression? Or would they back away, fearing a longer conflict that no one truly wants? Inside China, the government would likely rally its people around a narrative of victory and national pride if they succeeded. But they would also have to deal with huge costs: economic hits from trade blockades, international isolation, and the risk of more clashes on other borders if rivals sense weakness or distraction. For Taiwan, any day after an invasion would be a day of rebuilding or continued resistance. And for the United States and its allies, the lesson would be harsh but clear. Global security cannot be taken for granted. If two powerful countries can clash this way, what stops others from following the same path over old disputes? This is why many people watching the Taiwan situation do not just see it as a local issue. They see it as a test of whether we humans have learned enough from the past century of brutal wars to choose a different path when tensions get high. Can we find ways to negotiate, to build trust, to cool down national pride before someone reaches for the missiles and the tanks? Some argue that real solutions start with clear communication. Countries talking openly about red lines that must not be crossed, about what they will and will not tolerate. Some push for stronger international coalitions that can step in quickly to mediate or to put pressure on aggressors. Others say that economic ties and mutual dependence give a brake on war. If two countries need each other for trade and business, they have more to lose if they fight. But none of these ideas are perfect shields. History is full of moments when strong economic ties did not stop conflict, when treaties failed to hold back ambition, when good intentions were swept away by raw fear or pride, or the cold calculation of leaders willing to gamble with millions of lives. So the real work may lie deeper, building up a generation of people who demand that their leaders find another way, people who see through the slogans and the threats and ask harder questions about who benefits when soldiers march and bombs fall. Maybe that sounds naive. Maybe it is. But maybe that is the real point of thinking through nightmare scenarios like a war over Taiwan. Not to scare ourselves into hopelessness, but to remind ourselves how much is at stake and how badly we need to keep the peace alive. Because if you pull back from the maps and the satellite images and the endless war games, what you find are people. People who want to wake up in the morning and go to work, eat breakfast with their kids, walk to the store, plan for the future without wondering if a missile is going to fall out of the sky. They do not care about grand strategies or historical grudges. They care about living. And if there is any lesson worth learning again and again, it is that the true measure of strength is not how many missiles you have or how big your navy is. It is whether you can stop yourself from using them. That is the world I hope we keep pushing for, no matter how hard or unlikely it might seem in the heat of headlines and daily tension. It is the world where Taiwan keeps its freedom to decide its own future, where China finds pride without needing to send young people beaches, in a bigot, where big powers argue but do not destroy each other's cities to prove a point. And it is the world where the rest of us watch closely, speak up when leaders push us too close to the edge, and keep reminding each other that once a war like this starts, there are no easy stops, no magic off switches, no quick fixes. There is only damage, regret, rebuilding, and the quiet question of whether we could have done better. That is the true story behind all the headlines about Taiwan and China and flyovers and fleets and missiles. It is the story of whether we are ready to handle the rough parts of our history without repeating them, whether we can stand on the edge of a dangerous moment and choose to turn away from the old path, the one paved with ruins and graves. May we remember that choice every time we see news from the Taiwan Strait, every time we hear talk about tension or war. May we remember it when leaders tell us we have no other option but to fight, because we always do, we always can.